In 2019, a man walked out of the Montana wilderness alone, 5 years after vanishing with his 3 brothers. He couldn't remember what happened to them, but in his jacket pocket, searchers found a hand-drawn map with a single X marked in red. The map wasn't drawn on paper. It was sketched on the back of a 1987 hunting permit, a permit that belonged to someone else, someone who had also vanished in the same mountain range 30 years earlier. And the X, it marked a location the search teams had never checked. This is the story of 4 brothers who went into the mountains together and the one who came back alone. October 2014. The Bitterroot Range stretched along the Montana-Idaho border like a wall of granite and snow. This wasn't wilderness for beginners. These mountains had claimed lives before. But for the Carson brothers, this was home territory. They'd hunted these ridges since childhood, following their father's old trails, knowing which valleys held elk and which slopes turned deadly when the weather shifted. There were 4 of them. Michael, 26, worked construction in Missoula. He was the steady one, the planner. Jacob, 24, taught high school biology and could identify animal tracks at a glance. Ryan, 22, had just finished his EMT training and carried the medical kit. And then there was Ethan, 19, fresh out of high school, eager to prove he belonged on a trip with his older brothers. They set out on October 9th. The forecast was clean. 3 days, maybe 4. They'd hunt the high country near Lost Horse Creek, an area their father had taken them to years before. They told their mother they'd be back by Sunday evening. She made them promise to check in from the trailhead when they came out. The first day was perfect, cold, clear, with fresh snow dusting the peaks above them. They made camp at 7,800 feet, just below the tree line. That night, they sat around the fire, talking about their father, who'd passed 2 years earlier. Jacob pointed out constellations. Ryan told bad jokes. Ethan carved his initials into a log, the way he'd done as a kid. Michael took a photo of all 4 of them, arms around each other's shoulders, smiling. It was the last photo ever taken of them together. On day 2, they split up to cover more ground, standard practice. They each carried radios, set to the same frequency. Michael and Jacob went north along the ridge. Ryan and Ethan worked the valley below. They planned to meet back at camp by 3 p.m. The weather was holding. Everything felt routine, except none of them made it back to camp. By 6 p.m., when the brothers hadn't returned, no one knew yet. They were alone out there, with no way to call for help. The nearest road was 15 miles away. Cell service didn't exist this deep in the range, and the temperature was already dropping. By Sunday night, when the brothers failed to return home, their mother called the county sheriff. By Monday morning, search and rescue teams were mobilizing. By Monday afternoon, they'd found the camp. The tent was still standing, sleeping bags laid out, food hanging in a bear bag, the fire pit cold, but clearly used within the last 48 hours. But no sign of the brothers, no blood, no struggle, no note, just 4 sets of tracks leading away from camp in different directions, and then nothing. The search lasted 3 weeks. 90 volunteers. That number doesn't capture what it really meant. It meant ranchers leaving their cattle unfed, teachers taking unpaid leave, college students driving 12 hours from Seattle because they'd seen the story on the news. It meant a community that refused to let 4 of their own simply disappear. The command post was set up at the trailhead parking lot. White tent, folding tables covered in topographic maps, radio operators working in shifts around the clock. Sarah Ortiz, who'd worked search and rescue for 15 years, had never seen a mobilization this large for a missing persons case. Usually, after the first 72 hours, the crowds thinned. People had jobs, lives, but not this time. The Carson mother, Patricia, stayed at the command post every single day. She sat in a folding chair wrapped in a blanket her sons had given her for Christmas, drinking coffee that had gone cold hours before, watching the tree line as if she could will her boys to walk out of it. Other mothers brought her food. She didn't eat. They brought her words of comfort. She didn't hear them. She just watched the trees. The search dogs picked up scents near the camp, but then lost them. All 4 trails simply ended within a quarter-mile, as if the brothers had been plucked from the earth by invisible hands. The handlers couldn't explain it. Dogs didn't just lose scent trails in open terrain, not 4 separate trails, not all at once. Helicopters equipped with thermal imaging flew grid patterns over the range. They spotted elk, bear, even a lost hiker who didn't know he was part of a search operation, but no sign of the Carson brothers. The thermal cameras could detect body heat through forest canopy, through light snow cover, but they found nothing. It was as if the mountains had swallowed 4 men whole and left no trace of the meal. By the end of week 1, the official search radius had expanded to 30 square miles. Volunteers were covering terrain that made experienced climbers nervous. Loose talus slope, box canyons with no exit, creek beds that turned into rapids when the afternoon snowmelt came down, and still nothing. Not a boot print, not a piece of torn fabric, not a single granola bar wrapper. The media descended during week 2. Local news became national news. The story had everything they loved. Young men in their prime, a wholesome family tradition turned tragic, a mystery with no answers. Reporters set up outside Patricia Carson's house. They interviewed neighbors, former teachers, anyone who'd ever known the brothers. They built narratives, the all-American family, the great outdoors turned deadly, the mother who refused to give up hope. Patricia gave exactly 1 interview. She sat on her front porch, hands folded in her lap, and looked directly into the camera. "My boys know these mountains," she said, her voice steady. "If they're alive, they'll find a way home, and if they're not, then someone needs to bring them back to me. Either way, I'm not leaving that parking lot until I have an answer." The interview went viral. Donations poured in. The reward fund hit $50,000. A senator from Montana flew in to meet with the search coordinator. The governor issued a statement. Everyone wanted to help. Everyone wanted to be part of the solution. But by week 3, the reality set in. October in the Bitterroot Range meant freezing temperatures at night. Early November meant snow, deep snow, the kind that buried everything. If the brothers were injured and immobile, they'd already be dead. If they were mobile but lost, they'd have found a way out by now. The only remaining possibility was the one no one wanted to say out loud. They were already dead when the search began. On day 22, the official search was called off. The volunteers were thanked. The tents were folded. The maps were rolled up. Sarah Ortiz stood with Patricia Carson in that empty parking lot and said the word she'd been dreading. "I'm sorry. We did everything we could." Patricia nodded. She didn't cry. She just looked up at the mountains one more time, and then she got in her car and drove home to a house that would feel empty for the next 5 years. 90 volunteers, helicopters, thermal imaging, tracking dogs. They combed every drainage, every ridge, every cave system within a 20-mile radius. They found nothing, no gear, no bodies, no answers. It was as if 4 grown men had simply evaporated into the wilderness. The case went cold. Cold cases don't close. They just fade. The active investigation ended, but the file stayed open. Technically open. Sarah Ortiz kept the Carson folder on her desk for 6 months, then moved it to a cabinet, then finally to the archives. But she never forgot it. No investigator forgets the ones they can't solve. The first year was the hardest. Patricia Carson called the sheriff's office every week, then every month, then every few months. "Just checking if there's anything new," she'd say, her voice smaller each time. There was never anything new. How could there be? The mountains didn't give up their secrets on a schedule. The community moved on the way communities do. It wasn't cruel. It was survival. At first, people couldn't stop talking about the Carson brothers. Then they could talk about other things too. Then the brothers became a story people told newcomers. "Oh, you're hiking Lost Horse Creek? That's where those 4 boys vanished back in 2014. Never found a trace." A ghost story. A cautionary tale. But not for Patricia. She kept her son's rooms exactly as they'd left them. Michael's construction boots by the door. Jacob's biology textbooks on the shelf. Ryan's EMT certification hanging on the wall. Ethan's high school diploma still in the frame. She washed their sheets every month. She celebrated their birthdays alone, with cake she didn't eat and candles she let burn down to nothing. People worried about her. Her sister tried to convince her to sell the house, to move somewhere without the memories. Patricia refused. "What if they come back and I'm not here?" she'd say. It wasn't denial. It was something deeper. A mother's contract with the universe. I will be here. I will be waiting, no matter how long it takes. The theories persisted. Online forums dedicated to missing persons cases picked up the Carson story. Amateur detectives analyzed every detail. Some claimed the brothers had faked their deaths to escape debt or legal trouble. Others suggested a serial killer operating in the national forests. A few insisted on government conspiracy, secret military operations, things that sounded insane but got thousands of upvotes anyway. None of it was true. But the truth was worse than conspiracy. The truth was simple, brutal, random. 4 men went into the mountains and the mountains kept them. No grand design, no meaning. Just bad luck and bad timing and the indifferent cruelty of nature. Sarah Ortiz thought about them more than she admitted. Late at night, lying awake, she'd replay the search in her mind. Had they missed something? Had there been a trail they didn't follow? A valley they didn't check thoroughly enough? She knew it was pointless. They'd done everything right. But doing everything right didn't always mean finding what you were looking for. By 2019, the Carson brothers were a cold case statistic. 4 names in a database. 4 faces on a missing persons website that no one visited anymore. 4 ghosts in the mountains. And then, on that July afternoon, one of those ghosts walked out. Theories multiplied. Some said they'd fallen into an unmapped mine shaft. Others suggested they'd gotten disoriented and died of exposure in separate locations. A few whispered about foul play, though there was no evidence of it. Their mother never stopped hoping. She kept their rooms exactly as they'd left them. 5 years passed, and then, on a warm afternoon in July 2019, a highway patrol officer pulled over on Route 93, 30 miles south of Missoula. A man was walking along the shoulder of the road, dirty, thin, barefoot. His clothes were torn, sun-faded, wrong for the season. He looked like he'd walked out of another era. When the officer approached him, the man looked up with hollow eyes and said, "My name is Ethan Carson. I need to go home." The officer didn't recognize the name immediately, but when he ran it through the system, every flag in Montana law enforcement lit up. Ethan Carson, missing since October 2014, presumed dead, but here he was, alive, walking down a highway 40 miles from where he'd vanished, as if the last 5 years had never happened. They took him to the hospital. St. Patrick Hospital in Missoula had seen a lot in its 100-year history. But a man returning from the dead after 5 years? That was new. The ER staff initially treated Ethan like any other exposure case. IV fluids for dehydration, wound care for his blistered feet, basic blood work. But when his identity came back, everything changed. Suddenly there were FBI agents in the waiting room, specialist consultations being arranged, a media blackout being enforced, and a mother being driven at dangerous speeds from her home, praying this wasn't a cruel mistake. Patricia Carson walked into that hospital room and saw her youngest son sitting on the edge of a bed, staring at his hands. He looked up when she entered. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then Ethan said in a small, confused voice, "Mom, why are you crying? We've only been gone 3 days." That's when Patricia understood. Her son had come back, but part of him was still lost in those mountains. The medical team worked methodically. Dr. Reese, a neurologist who'd specialized in trauma cases, ran Ethan through a battery of tests. Cognitive function? Normal. Motor skills? Normal. Language processing? Normal. Memory? Catastrophically abnormal. He could remember his childhood in perfect detail. He could recite the Pledge of Allegiance, do complex math, identify photos of family members. But from October 11, 2014 onward, there was nothing. A void. It's like someone took an eraser to 5 years of his life, Dr. Reese told the FBI team. I've seen amnesia cases before, head trauma, psychological shock, even dissociative episodes. But this is different. His brain is physically healthy. There's no neurological reason for this level of memory loss, which means the cause is psychological. And if it's psychological, then theoretically the memories are still there, locked away. The FBI wanted to try hypnosis, regression therapy, anything to access those buried memories. But Dr. Reese refused. His mind locked those memories away for a reason, she said. Forcing them open could shatter him completely. If he remembers, it needs to happen naturally, on his own timeline. But there was no timeline. Days passed, then weeks. Ethan remained trapped in 2014, constantly confused about why everyone was treating his return like a miracle. He asked for his brothers every single day. "When are they coming back?" he'd say. "Are they still at camp? Did something happen to them?" Patricia would hold his hand and lie. "They're okay, sweetheart. They're okay." What else could she say? That they'd been missing for 5 years? That the whole country had presumed all 4 of them dead? That she'd been planning memorial services in her head for half a decade? How do you tell your son that the world had moved on without him? The psychiatric evaluation painted a grim picture. Ethan's mind had experienced something so traumatic that his only defense was complete erasure. The leading theory was dissociative fugue, a rare condition where a person essentially becomes a different version of themselves to escape unbearable psychological pain. They can travel vast distances, survive in extreme conditions, all while having no conscious awareness of their actions. Think of it like autopilot mode, Dr. Reese explained. His conscious mind shut down completely. But his survival instincts kept him alive, walking, finding water, finding food, avoiding danger. For 5 years, Ethan Carson was basically a biological machine running on the most primitive programming: survive. But survive what? That was the question haunting everyone. What had happened in those mountains that was so terrible his mind chose 5 years of blank existence over remembering it? The answer was in his pocket, folded up, waiting to be discovered. And when Sarah Ortiz unfolded that hunting permit and saw the map, she knew the worst wasn't over. It was just beginning. Physically, he was in surprisingly good condition. Dehydrated, malnourished. His feet were badly blistered, but no major injuries, no broken bones, no signs of trauma. The doctors couldn't explain it. By all logic, he should have been dead within days of getting lost. But the real mystery wasn't his survival, it was his memory, or rather, his lack of it. Ethan couldn't remember what had happened, not the day they disappeared, not where his brothers were, not how he'd survived 5 years in the wilderness. His last clear memory was sitting around the campfire on the first night, carving his initials into that log. Everything after that was blank. A white void. 5 years. gone. The FBI brought in specialists, neurologists, trauma psychologists. They ran every test, CT scans, MRIs. His brain showed no signs of physical damage, no tumors, no lesions. But his memory? It was simply erased. Selective retrograde amnesia, they called it. Rare, but possible after severe trauma. But here's what made investigators uneasy. Ethan didn't just forget the traumatic event. He forgot 5 entire years. He thought it was still 2014. He asked for his brothers. He didn't understand why everyone was looking at him like he'd returned from the dead. If you're hooked on stories like this that blend real wilderness terror with unbelievable twists, hit that like button and subscribe for more. The search resumed immediately. This time they knew someone had survived out there. If Ethan had made it, maybe the others had too. They brought him back to the area, hoping something would trigger a memory. He walked the trails with them, looked at photographs of the camp, listened to recordings of his brothers' voices. Nothing. But then, a deputy checking Ethan's belongings found something. In the pocket of his jacket, the same jacket he'd been wearing when he vanished, there was a folded piece of paper. Except it wasn't paper. It was old, thick, yellowed. A hunting permit. And on the back, someone had drawn a crude map in pencil. The map showed a rough outline of the Bitterroot Range, a creek, a ridge, and in the center, a single X marked in red ink. The lead investigator, a woman named Sarah Ortiz, held it up to the light. The permit was from 1987, 32 years old, and the name printed on it wasn't Carson, it was Darren Hollis. Sarah's blood went cold. She knew that name. In October 1987, a solo hunter named Darren Hollis had vanished in the same mountain range. Same general area, same time of year. He'd been 28 years old, experienced, well-equipped. The search had found his truck at the trailhead, but no trace of the man himself. It became one of Montana's oldest unsolved missing persons cases. And now, 32 years later, his hunting permit had just walked out of the wilderness in the pocket of a man who'd been missing for 5 years. The connection was impossible to ignore, but it raised more questions than it answered. How did Ethan get Hollis's permit? Had he found a body? Had he found some kind of shelter, some place Hollis had died? And if so, why couldn't he remember? Sarah studied the map. The X was marked in a location the search teams hadn't fully explored in 2014. It was in a remote canyon, accessed only by a dangerous descent down a near-vertical rock face. Most searchers had deemed it too risky, and besides, there'd been no indication the brothers had gone that way. But now they had a reason to look. 3 days later, Sarah led a small team into the canyon. It took them 6 hours to reach the location marked on the map. The terrain was brutal, loose scree, hidden drop-offs. At one point, they had to rope down a 50-foot cliff face. It was the kind of place you'd only go if you were desperate or if you knew something was there. At the bottom of the canyon, they found a cave. It wasn't visible from above. The entrance was hidden behind a rockfall, barely wide enough for a person to squeeze through. Sarah clicked on her flashlight and went in first. The air inside was cold, stale. The cave went back farther than her light could reach. 20 feet in, she stopped. There were initials carved into the wall. Fresh, within the last few years. MCJCRCEC, Michael Carson, Jacob Carson, Ryan Carson, Ethan Carson. All 4 brothers had been here. But the cave was empty. No bodies, no gear, no sign of what had happened to them. Just those initials, carved deliberately, as if they'd wanted to leave proof they'd survived this long. Sarah moved deeper. The cave narrowed into a tunnel. Her team followed. 50 feet, 100, and then the tunnel opened into a larger chamber. And that's when they found him, Darren Hollis, or what was left of him. The skeleton was slumped against the far wall, still wearing the remains of a hunting jacket. A rifle lay across his lap, rusted but intact. Next to him was a small journal, water-damaged, most of the pages illegible. But the last entry, dated November 3, 1987, was barely readable. Leg broken. Can't climb out. No one knows I'm here. If someone finds this, tell my wife I tried. He'd died alone in this cave, 32 years ago, waiting for a rescue that never came. But that wasn't the most disturbing part. Next to Hollis's body, there were supplies, recent supplies, a water bottle, energy bar wrappers, a wool blanket still folded, and carved into the wall next to the supplies, a message in the same handwriting as the initials. We found him. We stayed. Don't look for us. The forensic team analyzed everything. The handwriting matched Michael Carson's. The supplies had been placed there within the last 5 years, and the message was clear. The brothers had found this cave. They'd found Hollis's body, and for some reason they'd decided to stay. But why? And where were they now? If you're gripped by this wild turn of events, hit that like button and subscribe for more. The theory began to form slowly, pieced together from the evidence. The brothers had gotten separated on day 2, maybe disoriented by weather, or injured, or simply turned around in terrain that all looked the same. Somehow, maybe by accident, maybe by desperation, they'd found this cave. And inside, they'd found Darren Hollis, proof that people could vanish here without a trace. The FBI brought in a psychological profiler. His theory was dark, but it fit. Trauma bonding, survival mentality. The brothers, faced with the reality of being lost and the search potentially failing, might have made a collective decision. They had shelter, a water source nearby. They could survive if they wanted to. But why would they want to? Why not signal for help? Why not try to get out? The profiler suggested that something had broken in that cave. Some psychological threshold had been crossed. Maybe one of them was injured too badly to move. Maybe they feared being prosecuted for something, some accident they thought they'd be blamed for. Or maybe, in the isolation and darkness, they'd simply stopped wanting to return to the world. It sounded insane. But it happened. People vanished by choice more often than anyone wanted to admit. But if that was true, what had happened to Ethan? And why couldn't he remember? They brought Ethan back to the cave, slowly, carefully, hoping it would trigger something. He stood at the entrance, staring into the darkness. His breathing quickened. His hands started shaking. And then, for the first time in 5 years, something surfaced. "We were supposed to stay together," he whispered. "Michael said we had to stay together." It wasn't much, but it was something. Over the next few weeks, fragments began to emerge. Never full memories, just pieces, flashes. Ethan remembered cold. He remembered his brothers' voices, arguing about something. He remembered being afraid, but he couldn't remember why. And he remembered leaving, walking away, his brothers calling after him, but he kept walking. "I had to get out," he told Sarah one afternoon, tears streaming down his face. "I don't know why. I just had to get out." The psychiatrist explained it as dissociative fugue, a rare psychological condition where a person under extreme stress enters a trance-like state and flees from their situation. They can travel for miles, even years, with no conscious memory of it. Their mind essentially shuts down to protect them from unbearable reality. Ethan had walked out of that cave, away from his brothers, and his mind had erased the entire experience to protect him from the guilt and trauma of leaving them behind. But the question remained, where were Michael, Jacob, and Ryan? Sarah organized another search of the cave system. Cave rescue is its own specialty. You can't just walk into a deep cave system and start digging. One wrong move and the whole thing comes down on your head. Sarah brought in specialists from the National Speleological Society, people who understood rock formation, structural integrity, the way weight and pressure worked underground. They mapped the cave first. Using 3D laser scanning technology, they created a complete digital model of every chamber, every tunnel, every crack. The cave was far more extensive than they'd initially thought. It went back nearly a quarter mile into the mountain, branching into at least 7 different passages. Some were wide enough to walk through upright. Others required crawling on your belly through spaces barely wider than your shoulders. The chamber where they'd found Darren Hollis was cataloged as Chamber A. The 3 branching tunnels beyond it were labeled Passage 1, 2, and 3. The collapse was in Passage 2, approximately 200 feet from Chamber A. The 3D scan showed it clearly. A massive fall of rock, ceiling to floor, cutting off whatever lay beyond. Ground-penetrating radar gave them a rough estimate of what they were dealing with. The collapse was between 15 and 20 feet deep. Tons of limestone and granite, all interlocked like a deadly game of Jenga. One piece removed wrong, and the whole passage could come down. Or worse, they could trigger a secondary collapse that would seal the cave entirely. The excavation team arrived in late September. 8 specialists. They worked in 4-hour shifts, 2 people at a time, in a space barely large enough to stand. The first week, they moved less than 3 feet. Each rock had to be assessed, documented, tested for stability. Only then could it be removed. And when it was removed, it had to be passed back through the tunnel, hand to hand, all the way out to the entrance. It was brutal work. The cave temperature stayed around 45 degrees year-round. The humidity was near 100%. Your clothes never dried. Your hands were always cold. And the psychological weight of working in near total darkness, hundreds of feet underground, knowing that the family of 4 dead men was waiting for news above ground, it broke people. 2 team members quit after the first week. One had a panic attack in Passage 2 and had to be escorted out. Another simply said, "I can't do this anymore," and walked away. Sarah didn't blame them. She'd been in that cave. She'd felt the weight of the mountain pressing down. She understood. But the team that stayed was committed. They'd seen the initials on the wall. They'd read Michael Carson's message. "We found him." We stayed. Don't look for us. These weren't just bodies they were excavating. This was a story, and stories deserved endings. By early October, they'd made it through half the collapse. The work got more dangerous the deeper they went. The rocks on the far side of the collapse weren't as stable. They shifted when touched. Dust and small debris fell constantly. The team started wearing full climbing helmets with headlamps, protective gear they'd hoped wouldn't be necessary. On October 7th, they hit a gap. Not open space, but a small void in the collapse where they could shine a light through and see what lay beyond. Sarah was called down immediately. She crawled into Passage 2, squeezed past the excavation team, and put her face to the gap. The smell hit her first. Old death, stale air, the unmistakable scent of decay, muted by years and cold but still present. She clicked on her flashlight and looked through the gap, and she saw them. This time they went deeper, past the chamber where they'd found Hollis, into tunnels that branched in 3 directions. They used ground-penetrating radar, cadaver dogs, acoustic sensors, and in a narrow passage, almost 200 feet from the entrance, they found something. A collapse. Recent. Within the last 5 years, tons of rock had come down, sealing off whatever lay beyond. It would take weeks to excavate safely, maybe months, and there was no guarantee they'd find anything. But Sarah felt it in her bones. The brothers were on the other side of that collapse. The excavation began in September 2019. It was slow, dangerous work. Every rock removed risked another collapse, but the team persisted, and on October 9th, exactly 5 years to the day after the brothers vanished, they broke through. Behind the collapse was another chamber, smaller, darker, and inside they found 3 bodies: Michael, Jacob, Ryan. They were together, huddled against the back wall, as if they'd known the end was coming and wanted to face it as a family. The collapse had cut off their air supply. They'd suffocated within hours, maybe days, of the rockfall. There was no sign of struggle, no desperation, just 3 brothers, side by side in the dark. Next to Michael's body was a small notebook. Inside, he'd written a final message. The handwriting was shaky, oxygen-starved, but legible. "Ethan got out. That's all that matters. Tell Mom we were together. Tell her we weren't scared." The cave had taken them, just like it had taken Darren Hollis decades before. But they'd made sure one of them escaped. If this heart-wrenching journey keeps you on edge, hit that like button and subscribe for more. The investigation concluded that the brothers had been trapped by the initial rockfall. Michael, the planner, had realized they wouldn't all make it out, so he'd sent Ethan, the youngest, the one with the best chance of survival. He'd given him the hunting permit with the map, hoping someone would find it and come looking, and Ethan, traumatized beyond comprehension, had walked. His mind had erased it all: the entrapment, his brothers' faces as they told him to go, the sound of the cave collapsing behind him. 5 years of wandering, surviving on instinct alone, until finally he emerged on that highway, not even knowing he'd been gone. The Carson brothers were buried together in Missoula. Hundreds attended the funeral. Ethan stood at the graveside, silent, his memory still mostly blank. But he held the photograph from that first night, the one of all 4 of them around the campfire, smiling. Experts said his memory might never fully return. The mind protects itself in powerful ways. Maybe that was a mercy. Maybe some things weren't meant to be remembered. But on quiet nights, Ethan sometimes has dreams. Not full memories, but impressions. His brothers' voices, the sound of rock falling, and Michael's hand on his shoulder, pushing him forward, whispering, "Go. Don't look back." Ethan doesn't know if these are real memories or his mind trying to fill the void, but he holds on to them anyway, because they're all he has left of the moment his brothers saved his life by giving up their own. The cave where they died has been sealed permanently. A small plaque marks the location, listing 5 names. Darren Hollis, 1987. Michael, Jacob, Ryan, and Ethan Carson, 2014. The first 4 lost to the mountain. The 5th given back. Ethan still lives in Missoula. He doesn't go into the mountains anymore. He can't, but sometimes he drives out to the edge of the Bitterroot Range and looks up at the peaks, wondering what really happened in those 5 years, wondering if, somewhere in the darkness of his forgotten past, he said goodbye to his brothers, or if they simply let him walk away, knowing it was the only way. He'll never know the answer, and maybe that's the kindest thing the mountain ever did for him. If this journey through survival and mystery captivates you, hit that like button and subscribe for more, because some stories don't end when the person returns. Sometimes that's when the real questions begin.